Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slash Filmcast. I am David Chen, and with me are.
Mr. Hardwire.
Jeff Canada.
Hold on, let's do that again, Devindra. The beginning of your stuff was cut off. Here we go.
Okay.
Let's do 3, 2. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Slash Filmcast. I'm David Chen, and with me are.
Mr. Hardwire.
Jeff Canada.
And joining us today, he is the host of the Amazing Spider Talk podcast, Dan Gvozden. Welcome back to the Slash Filmcast. Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm thrilled to be back here.
And we are glad to have you back because today, for our featured review on the Slash Filmcast, we're going to be discussing Spider-Man Far From Home, or as I refer to it, Spider-Man Far From Home.
Dan it's just amazing that there are so many Spider movies coming out. We just get to come back over and over. It's like Spider movie, Dan Gvozden, Dan Gvozden, Dan Gvozden. It's just it's crazy here.
Indeed.
I've assured myself a fourth spot on the show every 6 months. I'm just hitching to that wagon. Yeah.
Well, looking forward to chatting about it with you, Dan. You can find more episodes of this podcast at slashfilmcast.com. You can also email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. We're going to start with some follow-up this week, follow-up to last week's discussion about yesterday, move on into some what we've been watching, and then conclude with our in-depth review of Spider-Man. So let's get to it. Jeff Canada, I think you wanted to address something regarding our conversation about yesterday, right? And we should say that we talked about yesterday last week. Very, very minor spoilers for yesterday will follow in the next few minutes to kind of refer back to our conversation from last week. But yeah, Jeff, take it away.
Well, I just wanted to mention that we have the Slack Filmcast, which is a wonderful community of people who are on Slack and talking about the podcast, talking about movies, talking about all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, sign up at slackfilmcast.com. Yeah.
Yeah. I very much enjoy reading all of the discussion that happens there, and I think the people that participate are just great. So this isn't to say anything other than that. I really enjoyed some pushback in my some pushback to my review of yesterday in the Slack Filmcast. This comes from Hysum, Hysum, in the film Slack. It's a pretty lengthy post. I won't try to read the whole thing, but basically he said that my review of yesterday, which was last week, he thought was a little unfair to the movie because I was talking about what the movie wasn't and not taking the film on its own terms and talking about how disappointed I was that the movie didn't embrace its sci-fi-ness more and didn't explore the premise. And so he thought that I really wasn't being fair to the movie because I was talking about the movie that it wasn't rather than the movie that it was. And I think that's a pretty fair criticism most of the time, in the sense that talking about what a movie isn't oftentimes misses the point, right? You're not actually taking the movie on its own terms. You're bringing your own baggage into the film. And I think that can be leveled at me sometimes and at other people sometimes who talk about movies and talk about all the things that they wanted them to be but weren't. I take issue a little bit in this particular case because from my perspective, I thought that the movie brought up the premise. The movie established the premise and raised a bunch of really juicy, really interesting questions in its sci-fi premise. The movie was a sci-fi movie. It was this magical thing happened, and that magical thing has lots of ramifications that a viewer can't help but start to imagine. In fact, the movie banks on that. The movie is quite literally getting my money to come in and sit down in the movie theater based on that central question. And then my feeling is that it just doesn't have any interest in exploring that question. It's much more interested in being a pretty bland romantic comedy. And I brought up another movie by the same writer called About Time that I think does that same thing brilliantly. It actually does explore its sci-fi premise and also manages to be a very satisfying romantic comedy at the same time. So I think both this writer can do it and it can be done as a movie. I just don't think this movie did it. So while I respect the pushback and saying, well, you're just kind of talking about what the movie isn't rather than what it is, I really don't think that's fair in this case, in the sense that the movie itself establishes the questions. The movie itself is using the questions as a hook, and then just completely doesn't care to reel me in as a fish. It just goes, oh, thanks, I'm glad you're hooked. Now let's talk about this love story. And that was my issue with the movie.
I don't know if I agree with you about sci-fi, but certainly fantasy. I'd feel like is a apt description of the movie.
Well, genre. I guess I just used that as a catch-all for genre.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I would say that like if the movie's romance was more interesting, you probably would be willing to forgive its flaws, right?
I think that's fair too. Yeah, I did have big problems with the romance as it played out in the movie too.
Yeah. I read this great piece by Dorian Linsky over at GQ.com that I felt like really summarized my problems with the movie. He writes here, I accept that a brisk, feel-good movie stuffed with some of the most beloved songs of all time will be a massive hit, and the standard response to a music journalist's complaints will be, turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream. I certainly didn't expect Lost-style layers of exposition, but mainstream entertainment is perfectly capable of unpicking the darker, weirder implications of a naughty premise. It's a Wonderful Life shows the ripple effect of plucking out of the world a man who thinks he's insignificant. Back to the Future Part 2 makes the future pivot on whether or not a school bully gets hold of a sports almanac. Even Richard Curtis's own About Time makes an effort to clarify how its version of time travel functions. Yesterday, however, hits you with a mouth-watering proposition, then shows no interest in exploring it, and not in a spooky, dreamlike, life's a mystery David Lynch kind of way. Not only does Curtis not answer the questions he has raised, he doesn't even appear to notice he has asked them.
Yeah, that's very well
said.
said.
I thought that was very apt. It's like not even like he's not even answering the question. It doesn't even seem like they understand that taking the Beatles out of the universe would be a like world-altering
It's
event.
a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal that like, yeah, I want to see that movie. I'm very curious about what you think happens when that movie. And they're like, yeah, I'll tell you what happens. Two people fall in love.
Yeah,
So
like
what? No. That's the least interesting part of what happens. So.
There's seemingly like no consequences other than that this guy, knows the songs and other people don't, and that the songs never like charted. But
let me ask you guys a broader question that I think was raised in the Slack Filmcast, which is, how do you feel about this notion of reviewing a movie or taking a movie or criticizing a movie for what it is rather than what it is not?
I think there's the idea of like, I think this is something that seeps into a lot of modern film criticism, which is that, and something that we have on occasion, if not frequently, do here on the podcast, which is we often talk about the movie we wish that it had been rather than assessing what it was, rather than what it was trying to do. But I think the thing with Yesterday is, I think that even taken on its own terms, the movie doesn't do a particularly good job. Like, even if this is just a romantic comedy, I think that it comes up lacking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so
it's
like
not super original in that respect.
Right.
Yeah.
If it was like a super innovative romantic comedy that's like, oh wow, like I've never seen anything like this before. I rewatched Notting Hill this week. My wife was not feeling well. She put on Notting Hill in the background. And that movie still gets to me, man. I'm just a girl standing in front of a boy, asking him to love her. I mean, that is one of the classic romantic comedy lines delivered incredibly well by Julia Roberts. It's also a Richard Curtis film. And, that movie, theoretically, for all its flaws, did break ground in the romantic comedy genre that I don't feel like Yesterday did. And so I guess what I'm saying, Jeff, is I agree you should take movies on their own terms. But I don't know that we didn't do that. I think we actually did do that in our discussion of Yesterday. So that's my thoughts.
I think a good discussion of a film could have a bit of both, right? Like, that's it. But yeah, I like to focus on what it is. Certainly, if you're really disappointed, like Jeff was, I could certainly see just dreaming of like what it could be.
I feel like sometimes when we review a film based off of what we want it to be, it's not often an unfair thing to like lobby at a film, because it's often in response to questions that are presupposed that we want to see an answer to. And in Yesterday's case, while I haven't seen the film and based on your accounts of it, this question that's asked about removing the Beatles from the world, it's like a liberty too far if you're trying to present this world realistically, which I don't know if the film does. I imagine it's probably slightly heightened, but like I don't think it's unfair to like ask of it some things if you are going to invest your own acceptance of what it's putting forward. So it's not that you're like criticizing it for what it's not. It's you're trying to believe in what it's putting forward, and it's not providing the equal amount to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that's another way to put it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Dylan McInnes in the live chat room, we're broadcasting live as usual, reminds us, like, as Jeff mentioned, you only get to do the yesterday premise once. Which was, Jeff, very similar to your criticism of the Happy Time Murders, which is the dirty Muppet movie, right? Like, no one's going to be able to do another movie like Yesterday for decades at least, right?
Right.
No, you can't do like, oh, we wake up and then there's no Beatles. Like, you won't be able to do that again because it's like they just did that. So that in itself, like...
You had one shot. And you didn't really do it justice, and that's the problem. Yeah, I agree. Happy Time Murders was the same way. You had one shot to do the R-rated Muppet movie, and this is what you made?
But that's kind of an argument for, like, critiquing a film for what it isn't, right? Because it's like, this is idea of commerce also factors into the criticism, which is, you only have one shot, so because the movie didn't use its one shot particularly well, you're more critical than you would be if it was, like, just a regular romantic comedy without an extremely intriguing high concept premise, right? So,
but even beyond the premise is the franchise or the IP of the Beatles. We don't get to see that very often. So you think that if they're going to pull out that check, they're going to do something really interesting with it.
Yeah, and it's hard to say like what other band you could do it with that would be equally impactful. Like,
there isn't one.
There isn't one.
It's not like you could do it with Avatar.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just blow, man.
All right. Well, anyway, thanks for all the comments and criticisms of our discussion on Yesterday. Also, this is not really a spoiler. It's like an anti-spoiler. It's like telling something that doesn't happen in the movie. But so again, we're still in like Yesterday spoiler kind of mode here. But Papul from Texas wrote in to /filmcast@gmail.com, and one of the big gags in Yesterday is the idea that like when he first wakes up, he's like Googling the Beatles, and it's like, oh, the Beatles isn't there, and then he Googles like a bunch of other bands to see if they're still there, and Oasis isn't there, right? And we mentioned
it's a good joke.
It's a joke because Oasis is widely regarded to be, a Beatles ripoff, right? Or that they owe very much to their predecessors, the Beatles, and so the idea that if the Beatles never existed, Oasis would never exist, like that is definitely a potent idea.
Well, also it's a reference to the fact that they said we're bigger than the Beatles, which was ripping off the Beatles saying we're bigger than God.
Jesus, I think.
Jesus, yeah. So there's layers.
Well, Papul writes a big part of the movie is that Ellie fell in love with Jack when he played Wonderwall in junior high school. We get several flashbacks to this. So wouldn't you think that once Jack realizes Oasis never exists in this alternate universe, that the first thing he'd do is ask Ellie what song he played for her at that junior high school performance?
That is such a good point.
I was waiting for him to ask her, since that flashback is so pivotal to their romance and thus of monumental importance to the love story. And if he never asks her, he knows the pre-blackout Ellie was so moved by his Wonderwall rendition, and this Ellie had never even heard the song. It feels like the movie is completely set up.
It would be something else. Yeah.
It's the perfect setup.
It feels like the movie was completely set up to have him perform Wonderwall to her to win her back. Otherwise, there is no point whatsoever in pointing it out.
Wow, my mind is blowing right now. It seems like it's a Back to the Future-esque setup.
Yeah.
Like the perfect setup that is completely not paid off at all.
In that fantasy movie, he plays Wonderwall at the end, and the Gallaghers come out of nowhere and they save the world just like they want to. That's the perfect ending.
I'm sure they just didn't want to upstage the Beatles by playing Oasis.
Yeah.
But then why set it up?
Why mention it at all? You didn't need to mention it.
I'm just kidding.
Jeff's criticisms of the movie went down many rabbit holes, but this seems like a very basic point in the film and should be the beginning of any negative criticism, end quote.
I agree. It didn't even occur to me, but bravo. Man. It seems so obvious in retrospect that, like, how do you not make that a huge plot point. It feels like he's so right in that it is laboriously established multiple times.
Multiple times,
see this
repeatedly.
flashback.
Yeah.
And yet nothing is made of it. And ripe for something. Wow. Wow.
All right, folks. Well, I think that actually took a little bit longer than I thought. So maybe we'll save the Slash Film Court for another day. But let's start with what we've been watching this week. Dan Gvozden, this week you and I both watched movies that are longer than 2 hours and 20 minutes that are now available on home video. And these are like fairly controversial movies. And I thought it might be worth mentioning both of them. Let's start with the one I watched, which is called Dragged Across Concrete. This is the new S. Craig Zahler movie that stars Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn. Devindra, you have not seen this movie yet, right?
I haven't seen it, even though I really liked Brawl and Cell Block. So it's the thing. I was worried about this movie, right? Because Mel Gibson, I just still have a huge distaste for the guy at this point. And also, there's a lot of chatter about Craig Zahler. And I don't know what he believes, at least what you could tell from his movies. But what did you think, Dave?
Well, I think that S. Craig Zahler is... So let me just say this. This movie is 2 hours and 38 minutes long. It is an ugly, unpleasant, cruel film. There is a scene in so the basic premise is basically that Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn are two cops who are trying to take down some robbers. It's cops and robbers, basically. The neo-noir cops and robbers. And I will say that I was reminded of what Richard Linklater said when he was talking about Boyhood. This is something I've mentioned a few times on the podcast because I still think about it, right? When he was making Boyhood, Richard Linklater said that, like, you don't remember going to the graduation. You remember the car ride home from graduation, right? You remember, like, all the subtle moments in between the big moments even more. And so if you watch Boyhood, they don't show the graduation, but they show the car ride home from the graduation. And it's those little moments, those moments of connection, those moments of humanity that kind of form the fabric of our lives. And S. Craig Zahler really took that to the next level with Dragged Across Concrete. There is a scene in which Vince Vaughn's character eats a sandwich seemingly in real time. Like, it takes like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
You're
It's a
just
big
literally
sandwich too,
watching
right?
him eat
From
a
what I hear.
sandwich.
It's a big sandwich. It's not like a teeny tiny peanut butter sandwich. It's a big boy sandwich.
I think it's like
Dave,
a regular sandwich. You're just watching him eat a sandwich for 2 minutes.
You don't get to 2 hours and 38 minutes by not showing that.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. But there's moments of sandwich eating, but there's also like people going on extensive monologues about their lives and all like this kind of smart dialogue between these characters. Here's the pact I made with myself when I started watching Dragged Across Concrete. I'm like, well, I liked Bone Tomahawk, even though I found its racial politics to be a bit objectionable. I kind of didn't like Brawl and Cell Block 99 or whatever it's called. And so I'm like, Dragged Across Concrete stars Mel Gibson, who I share your distaste for, Devindra. Stars Vince Vaughn, stars S. Craig, is written and directed by S. Craig Zahler, whose politics are right-leaning. And so I'm like, this is all the setup for a movie I would hate and probably not enjoy. So I'm going to turn it on, and if at any point I don't like what's happening, I'm just going to walk away. Walk away. Just gonna press pause or press stop.
You're at the brothel to learn how to get away from the brothel.
David, we
walk
literally
away.
just last week had an entire segment in the Slash Film Court about how you don't do that.
Yeah.
You literally said at length that you don't turn off the movie because there's some chance in the last 14 seconds of the 2 hour and 38 minutes that some magical thing, some switch will be flipped and you'll like it all of a sudden.
Well, I would say that this is a movie that, per the reasons I said, predisposed itself to me not liking it, right? It's like I go in wanting to dislike it, right? And despite all that stuff I said, I still found it to be very engrossing. Like, I still watched it all the way to the end. I enjoyed many parts of it. I admired a lot of the craft of this movie. And I think in terms of S. Craig Zaller's politics, I'm obviously pronouncing his name multiple different ways. But in terms of his politics, like they are a mess as conveyed in his movies. I think that like, insofar as I can divine his politics, like if you look at Bone Tomahawk, essentially what happens in that movie is there are these people who are coded to be like Native Americans, but they're not Native Americans, because you encounter a Native American played by Zahn McClarnon in that movie who says, hey, like these people, they're barely even human, right? So like whoever they are, they're not Native American, but they're savages, right? And despite how bad the protagonist is, they're always fighting against somebody who's worse than them, right? Same with Cell Block 99 or whatever that movie was. Same Bone Tomahawk. It's always like these people who are like kind of problematic, but like they're fighting against the really evil people, right? Same formula in this movie, which is
it feels like it's somebody he's clearly somebody who loves like grindhouse cinema, like somebody like the Death Wish style of movies from back in the day. And it almost felt like, at least with Brawl, that he was sort of elevating it in a way, like beyond like Tarantino style. So that's what I appreciated about his work. But yeah, this one, there's just a lot more going on. But yeah, Dave, go on.
Yeah, because casting Mel Gibson as like at the beginning of the film, there's a scene where it's like, hey, I really wish like people recording things, like he's a cop and someone records him doing something bad, and it's like, man, I really wish people recording me wouldn't stop me from doing some good, honest work. You know, which is obviously, if you know what happened with Mel Gibson, very you can relate to that story.
Very meta.
It's very meta, but here's the thing: no matter how problematic Mel Gibson is, the people he's fighting against are like pure evil. Like they're like so terrible. Like the movie positions you to root for Mel Gibson because of the people he's fighting against, right? And so insofar as like his films have strong politics, they're about like these problematic men who, nonetheless, we need them on that wall. You know, we want them on that wall. We need them on that wall. And you know, that message may or may not resonate with you, but it's kind of a message. It's not a super strong message, but it's kind of a message. And I still managed to enjoy the film. Like I admired the movie a lot.
Yeah.
Despite
I think that's what's most I don't know. I feel guilty watching his movies sometimes because he is so good at certain types of things.
He's so good. Yeah. He's so good.
Like
and
tantric misery. Like you're just keep getting closer and closer to turning the TV off.
Yeah.
But you never quite get there.
And then like a face gets smashed and you're like, oh man, it's so good. That's what I want to see.
Tantric misery. He's the sting of feeling terrible, I guess.
I like what Adam Naiman wrote about him at TheRinger.com. He said, Zaller's specialty is cultivating an almost narcotic sense of boredom and then puncturing it with startling hairpin turns into obscene violence, like jabbing a strung-out junkie with a shot of adrenaline. This willingness to alienate viewers in two different ways at once, daring them to tune out, and then punishing them for sticking with it, is one reason that Zaller cuts a controversial figure. And that's right. It's like vast portions of the movie are very boring, and then all of a sudden, this ultra-violence that's super effectively done, and that like makes you feel gross for even having watched the movie. And then I'm like, oh man, like the fact that he made me feel this way, I like admire a filmmaker that can make me feel that, you know, even though he's misusing his abilities, right?
I'm feeling boredom passion through the microphone here, Dave.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, he's like the American Lars von Trier over here.
Yeah,
basically.
that's
weaponizing
not a bad way to describe it.
Cinematic misery. Yes.
Yeah. Well, speaking of cinematic misery, anyway, we'll just say that movie is Dragged Across Concrete, all right, and it is a terrible title for a movie, but it does evoke how you will feel watching the movie. So I think
Can I just say I really liked Bone Tomahawk. Yeah, I really liked that movie. I enjoyed that. I mean, it rests a lot on the charm of
Kurt Russell.
Kurt Russell, whom I adore. But I really enjoyed that movie. You know, less so Cell Block, but I have not seen this one, and your review makes me not really want to.
Yeah, I mean but there's some sequences that are like so effective that I'm like, man, that was really well done sequence. You know, like
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so torn. Like, it's one of those movies that I enjoyed and then like hated myself for enjoying, if that makes any sense, right? So
No,
that's
you're right. That does make me want to watch it.
that's
But
dragged
it's
across.
also like just one thing, like
Yeah.
he gets texture right. Like texture of a movie is a hard thing to describe, but for Brawl, he commissioned this original score that clearly evoked like classic like soul and like 70s music too. Like it was, even that aspect of it was really well done. Like that's a great soundtrack. So I don't know. I like that he commits to certain aspects of these films. Wish he didn't commit to things like Mel Gibson.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like it's interesting. I read like this is a piece that so provoked me. I read like 6 articles about it afterwards. I read interviews with him, to try to understand more what he's trying to do. And it's like he's very much like, oh, I just go where the characters take me. Like it's all character driven. Like I do what the characters, would be logical for the characters to do. And it's like that doesn't like absolve you necessarily of making a statement with your movie. Like. I think he wants to be like, well, we hired the right character for the role. It's Mel Gibson. And it's like, well, you're still kind of making a statement with the character. Like, but with that decision, you are making a statement that you can't just easily back away from. Yeah, it's problematic as heck, but it still is clearly made by a person who is very talented. So, Dragged Across Concrete. Speaking of extremely long slogs, Dan Gvozden, you had a chance to watch Under the Silver Lake, which is streaming right now on home video.
Oh boy.
Yeah, what did you think of this movie?
Well, this is the follow-up to It Follows, which is a weird thing to say, by David Robert Mitchell, who also did the Myth of the American Sleepover. And this is a film that's kind of had like a long and tortured history of making it to audience eyes. It was like advertised, I think, 2 years ago, and then went to Cannes where it was purchased and kind of came out for a weekend, I think, in LA. I'm not sure if it made its way to New York. Devindra, did it premiere up there too?
I think it was in theaters here. I totally missed it.
I'm pretty sure it was
also
a
just
day and
saw
date
it.
release, if I'm not mistaken, or it was like
Ah.
it was very close to. It's a situation where it was very controversial because it's an A24
Yeah.
film, and it was essentially released straight to DVD or straight to home video, right?
Didn't they like give it a shot in theaters and then it was like just tanking and then it was like, oh, straight to VOD then. Like
I
think
think
there
it
was a
made
bit of a
like
delay.
$47,000 in the
Yeah.
theater, something really terrible.
couple million,
yeah.
but yeah.
Oh, okay. But yeah, this film, I saw it day and date when it came out and paid the rental, but now it's, I watched it again recently and when it came on Amazon Prime for streaming, I think at the beginning of the month. And Dave, I know you're not a fan, but this is my favorite film of the year so far. It's just kind of captured me unlike anything else this year has. And I wouldn't recommend it for everybody. It's kind of this strange mix of like, I don't know, like Vertigo, Blue Velvet, and maybe something like Donnie Darko. It just sticks to this one tone the whole time. And for me, at least, that tone really worked. And, it really captured my imagination. And, it stars Andrew Garfield, Riley Keough, and Topher Grace appears in it as well. And in the film, Andrew Garfield's character, Sam, he meets this girl one night and they kind of hit it off, it seems. But when he returns to her apartment the next morning, she's completely gone. And he starts in this kind of like odyssey to decipher where she's gone based off of random clues that he's finding all over LA. And in that way, it's almost like Zodiac-like in its approach to obsession, but it quickly veers almost even and starts in absurdity. And for me, it's just a brilliant satire of the kind of people that are obsessed with finding meaning in everything, which in a way seems to be attacking someone like me as well, because I write these long Easter egg pieces about like hidden things and hidden messages in movies. And so I kind of appreciated that. And there are hidden Spider-Man Easter eggs in this movie as well, which is kind of humorous. But I just thought it was a brilliant portrayal of the kind of Hollywood lifestyle in LA in terms of just sending up everything about it, how it treats women, how enticing the world of Hollywood can be, and yet distancing. The idea of power brokers in this kind of Me Too movement. I feel like there's so much in this movie, and maybe that like leads to its 2 hour and 20-minute runtime. But I was captured the whole way through. It would be hard to spoil this because it's so absurd. But if you're willing to go on that ride, I feel like each scene escalates and pays off one after the next.
All right, well, that's Under the Silver Lake, and it's available on home video streaming on Amazon Prime. Devindra, I think you also saw this movie, right? What did you think of it?
I also saw it. I'm not gonna rain in your parade, Dan. I wanted to like this. Like I wanted your response to this movie because I've heard so many things about how well made it is and how just how like weird it is as a film. And as somebody who really loved It Follows, I'm totally down to see like what this guy does next. Instead, it just feels like a weird, lost, meandering film that doesn't quite know what it wants to be. I think there are some great points, like throughout this movie. There's some great scenes, and certainly one scene, like one big confrontation at the end, that I think is fantastic and kind of says a lot about pop culture and our relationship to it and things like that.
Yeah.
But the movie overall, like I wanted more from the mystery. I wanted more from the characters. Andrew Garfield's character seems to be a psychopath for some reason, and
Yes,
we
he
don't
absolutely is.
we don't quite even investigate that. Whereas like I could compare it to something like Donnie Darko, except that movie's entirely all about his mental well-being and exploring that in many ways, and that's reflected throughout the film. Whereas this movie just like adds layer upon layer of weirdness to where it just really didn't connect for me. But it was certainly worth watching. Yeah.
Under the Silver Lake feels a lot more like Inherent Vice to me than like
Don't you even, David Chen.
than any of the other movies that you listed, Dan. Okay,
And well, actually, I was thinking of that because as I was watching this movie, I was thinking like, man, I would like to see a nice breezy LA mystery again. I should just really be watching Inherent Vice instead of this movie. And I just kept saying that throughout this because to me, that movie, it knows what it wants to be. I think like even though that movie is also like very loosey-goosey about how it handles things and plot and story mechanics, I think there's a nice deep underlying core and all the characters are very true to themselves. Like I think the characters are very true in that movie, whereas I couldn't get a handle of anybody in this movie because it was just so many things at once.
It's funny. I feel very much the opposite. I felt like Inherent Vice. While I love that movie, I felt like its plot and the mechanics of it made no sense, and maybe intentionally. But here, if you buy into the logic of this world, it all fits together. Like especially on the second visit for me, like knowing where it goes, you can see all the pieces fitting. You just kind of have to accept that like it is not set in reality, but they give you all the clues you need, at least I felt, to piece this world together. It's riding that line of like it wants to kind of be set in reality and not, but I think like something like Mother, it very clearly from the beginning tells you it's an allegory or it's not to be totally believed 100%. And I guess it's really up to you, at least I feel like this, it's up to you to decide whether or not that's something that you can get on board with or not.
All right, well, that's Under the Silver Lake. It's on home video right now. Dan Gvozden, what else have you been watching this week?
Yeah, I had a really unique experience that I wanted to talk about briefly. The Academy does all these screenings in LA, films like retrospectives and things like that. But they had the most unique one I've ever seen because of the impossibility of its existence, which is they're doing this technical look back on the Star Wars franchise. And so they did a double billing of Rogue One, followed up by a 1977 print of Star Wars, which the impossibility of it is that George Lucas just does not let that be screened, much less at the Academy. Like maybe you have a bootleg, version, and you've watching it in your garage or something like that, but you're never going to get this pristine Academy screening of this because he won't allow it. And for some,
you're talking about the one like it's specifically without all the additional like Jabba CG shit and all that stuff, right? Like it's the original stuff without all of the special editions, new visual effects.
The original film, yeah, exactly. No updated effects or anything like that. It's just Star Wars without the A New Hope and all of that stuff. I never thought I would ever see this version presented in the theater. I'm too young to have been there in 1977, And so like this was my one shot. It was like a $5 ticket. And I thought, what the hell, like, let's see if this actually happens, because George Lucas is known to have shut down screenings like this before. Even last minute once he gets like the take on it. But the Academy worked with him, and I guess they must have pitched it to him that if they're doing a retrospective on the effects, they need to show how effects have aged or advanced in, the 30 plus years since the film, or 40 plus years rather. And it was an incredible experience. The reason the print existed was because it tore back in the initial run in 1977, right when the Death Star exploded. So they didn't want to, show this film with the big moment with a tear in it. So obviously the Academy doctored it back together, which I thought was funny because we watched Rogue One, which is all about getting the Death Star plans. And then this new film where we're building up to the signature moment of the Death Star blowing, and you can see the tape, across the film. But it was a really incredible experience. They had John Dykstra come out and talk about the Dykstra Flex, which is the camera that they use to, shoot the miniature effects and things like that. But truly one of the most unique cinema going experiences that in my life, and something I never thought I'd see. So if you live in LA, I can't, tell you enough. Get on the Academy's mailing list and check out some of these really unique experiences they had to offer.
All right, cool. Well,
sounds so incredible.
Yeah,
man.
that
I'm
does sound
jealous.
awesome, and I'm glad you got a chance to experience it.
I mean, it was the kind of thing where everybody there knew the kind of heightened nature of what they were going to see. So like the person announcing it was like, and in this one, Han shoots first. And then someone from the audience shouted, he's the only one that shoots, because Greedo never shot. So it was like everybody knew what they were in for, and that made it even extra special.
All right, well, that's Star Wars, and you saw the Academy screening of the 1977 print. Jeff Cannata, been watching a couple things?
I have. My wife and I are back on that Big Little Lies train, HBO's show that I think the first season was based on a novel, but I think this season is now off on its own a trajectory.
With like help with the author.
Yeah, help from the author of the novel. Yep.
David E. Kelley is the creator of this, adapter of it. First season, my wife and I both absolutely loved. It is the story of a very wealthy community in Monterey, and specifically a very wealthy private school for second graders, or at least a class of second graders at this school, the mothers of whom are all involved in a violent crime, and there's a mystery in the first season as to what that crime is and how it plays out and what their involvement is and who's responsible. And it features incredible performances across the board, and we loved it. And it felt like a very tough act to follow, especially now. We've seen with Game of Thrones, being untethered to the source material can often lead to, unsatisfying results. So I went into the season a little worried that it might not live up, but heartened by the fact that none other than Meryl Streep was joining the cast.
Uh-huh. It's like, how do you top that cast of the first season?
Yeah,
just add a dash of Meryl Streep.
If
Perfect.
only there's what woman could actually be an improvement here. There's really only one, and it's Meryl Streep. So I feel like the theme for this season is no one ever gets away with anything. You never get away with it, right? There are tendrils and seams and things that stick around and hang on, and psychologically it's hard to reckon with big acts. You see these movies where someone walks away at the end. It's like, the perfect crime or the perfect plan or whatever. And in a context of a film, you don't explore the actual ravaged psyche of the people involved. And really, season 2 so far of Big Little Lies is that. And specifically, the character who died in the first season, Meryl Streep plays his mother, and the spin that she puts on all these characters by just being this force of chaos, asking questions that no one wants asked, and really refusing to believe the kind of man he was in the first season is so powerful and really crazy making and riveting to watch. I'm thoroughly enjoying this season so far, and I feel like somehow they managed to top season 1. I don't know if it will end as satisfyingly, and they've sort of abandoned the conceit of the first season, which was flash forwards constantly teasing you about things to come. Yeah, that's a hard thing to
those
maintain.
interview cutaways were so awful in season 1.
They were
huge improvement.
Were.
So Big Little Lies season 2. It's on HBO right now.
Just quick shout out. Like, by the way, this season is entirely directed by Andrea Arnold.
Yes,
so good.
I love. Like, it's nice to have like another great indie filmmaker handling this whole season. The first season was Jean-Marc Vallée. So also good. And check out American Honey if you're digging this season, because she also did great work there.
She did great work there.
Fish Tank.
Fish Tank, exactly. That's like one of my favorites, Fish Tank. So, and Jeff, you've been watching one other thing.
Well, I wanted to bring this up. It's a short thing, actually less than 5 minutes long. It's a YouTube video, but I thought it would make for interesting discussion. I think, Dave, you tweeted this out as well. It's a YouTube video called The Problem Solving of Filmmaking. It was uploaded by Pony Smasher, who is actually the filmmaker David F. Sandberg, who happens to be the director of Shazam, a movie that I think all of us liked. I certainly did. And this YouTube video, in its short less than 5 minute running time, I think is one of the greatest lessons about how things are made that you can watch, and I highly recommend everyone checking it out. Basically, it is describing how the end product you see is the result of about 1 billion compromises and problems and figuring out how things have to fit together and worrying and different departments and different people all butting heads, and all of the things that we come out to a movie and say, oh man, what a dumb decision by the director, were about 400 decisions that led up to that. And it is such an illuminating thing. I thoroughly loved that insight. It takes a very mundane scene in the movie that really doesn't even spoil the movie at all and breaks down why it was shot the way it was. And things you wouldn't even notice in the context of the movie. It's a very short little moment, but it's like, there were so many problems that needed to be solved and so many things that were crazy. But my favorite thing about this short little video on YouTube is that in the context of describing all of these heart-wrenching, brain-breaking issues that he had to deal with in making this movie and making this moment of this movie, and in all of the compromises and stresses and things that didn't go the way he wanted them to go, he has this beautiful line, and it's a throwaway thing. Blink and you miss it. But he says, solving the problems is the fun. And it totally resonated with me. I'm working as I am now on the dungeon run and trying to invent a story that we improvise week to week. And I'm very, very proud of that show. And I have fallen in love with doing it because it's problem solving. I love spending 10, 20, 30 minutes just thinking and going, what problem do I need to solve? What thing have I not figured out yet? What thing has caused me problems? Has the players done that I didn't anticipate? How do I figure it out? And that is the creative process. And I love how Pony Smasher, David F. Sandberg, describes it here and just sort of mentions how difficult, how hard it is, but that's the joy. Like, that's actually what you come here for, why you engage in a creative act like this. And I found it very heartening and beautiful too.
Yeah, I agree. I would definitely recommend you check out this video, The Problem Solving of Filmmaking, which is on YouTube. We will link to it in the show notes. So if you want to just go to the show notes and tap on it, you can get to it. And I think the video is really helpful for a lot of people because I think that, like, it is super easy to be. Certainly when I started doing this podcast, we would often talk about, like, oh, the director did this, like you said, Jeff, like the director did this, or oh, the director shouldn't have done this. And what you realize is you have no idea whether the director did that or not. You know, you have no idea whether the director intended to do that, whether somebody else entirely made that decision, or whether
Or if the director beat him or herself up over and over, trying everything they could do not to do that, and it was
Yeah.
the least bad
the
decision
least
in
bad
the
way
moment.
they could have solved that problem. Exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah. And every not only every movie, every scene in every movie is often a result of all those compromises and all those decisions. So, excuse me. So I think that's a great illustration of that, and I would
But it's
definitely.
also,
Yep.
I'm sorry, just not to cut you off, but the thing that I love about that and what I want to reemphasize is that sounds so negative, and it kind of is in a weird way, but also like he comes away with it saying that's the fun.
Yeah.
That's the fun, is showing up on the day and going, oh, we can't do it this way, or can't do it, like, okay, let's figure it out. That's this wonderful creative challenge. And I found that positive spin on something that's kind of inherently negative really inspiring.
And it really goes to show that like a good movie is kind of a miracle.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Yep.
I always remember what Stephen Tobolowsky said to me about being in a classic movie, like how
Like these
to
6 or 10 of them that he has been in.
yeah. Well, he basically says like in order to be like have made it into a classic movie, you need to the movie needs to be good. You need to have been good in it, and people need to have seen it, right? Which is like for that series of circumstances to occur is so extremely rare in someone's life, and it happened for him in Groundhog Day, you know. And
Right.
and it's like, but it's just like, it's just really really tough to have that all those things happen, and you know the amazing coincidences that occur to make a good movie good happen all the time, and it's a miracle that any movie is even half good. So
The other anecdote that I always think about, it may be apocryphal, I don't know, but it is a commonly cited thing where Sir Laurence Olivier supposedly had this brilliant performance on stage, and a friend was in the audience and came backstage to congratulate him on this just thunderous, powerful performance. And as they opened the dressing room door, he was hunched over his makeup table crying. And they said, Larry, why are you crying? You were brilliant. And he said, I know, but I don't know why. One of those.
And what is your take home from that, Jeff?
Well, the idea is that as you said, being good is a miracle. No one knows how it happened. A whole bunch of things have to line up.
Yeah.
It's a lot of magical fairy dust. And even the best of the best, oftentimes it is elusive and ethereal as to why they even are doing a good job. So you just sort of like, jump into the void and do your best, and then crunch the problems. And I think that's the sort of the craftsmanship of it, the workaday just job of it.
I love the positive spin on this too. Like for a living, I teach high school filmmakers, and they can be very discouraged by making a bad movie. But it's like, no, you have to understand. If you were to make a great movie your first time out, that would be truly the mistake.
Yeah, you'd ruin everything.
All right, well, that's what we've been watching this week. Before we move on into our review of Spider-Man Far From Home, we got to thank all the people who donated to the podcast. Thanks to new subscriber Ragerland for subscribing at the rate of $2 per month. And we had a couple donors this week as well. Joseph Sanchez donated and said, thank you guys for all you do. And Jeff, thank you for the limericks. Also, shout out to Maddie H. for sharing my love of movies and kettle corn seasoning. So that's from Joseph. And also, John from Decatur, Georgia.
Decatur. I love Decatur.
Decatur,
Yeah.
Georgia.
Decatur.
Decatur.
Decatur is a Decepticon, I believe.
Yes, that's right. Gave a massive donation, like huge donation, and then all he wrote with the donation were the following words: "Thanks for all you do. Jeff's wrong about Avatar." That was the
Damn.
entire.
This is a rough week for Jeff.
That was the
Just saying.
entire description of that massive
I'm
donation.
wrong about it being good and fun to watch. I guess that's my position, is that it is good and fun to watch.
We should mention that we were shouted out for our Avatar conversation on the How Did This Get Made podcast this week. which, if you want to picture what that is, picture a podcast that is much funnier and more successful than the Slash Filmcast. That is How Did This Get Made?
Comedians.
With actual comedians. Huge fans of all those people on that show. And
we felt so honored to be mentioned by them. It's
and talking about one of the most consequential things of all time, the cultural footprint of Avatar, right? So,
yeah.
I mean,
where'd they come down on that, by the way, Dave?
I mean, I don't know. You got to ask Jeff Kanata.
Well, all I know is them discussing it is cultural relevance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, nice save, Jeff.
Yeah, you're welcome, Avatar.
I mean, this is how you should be remembered, Jeff. Is your Avatar position
on my gravestone?
Nothing about loving things. Nothing about the dungeon run. Just the whole Avatar thing.
My gravestone will say, "I see you," and thousands of people who walk by it will be like, "What does that mean?"
Yeah. It'll also say, "Still waiting for the Avatar sequels." 'Cause they will never come out.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Well, let's move on into our review of Spider-Man: Far From Home. Excuse me. All the coughing will be taken out in post.
You hope.
Beatty, please remove all the coughing. I'm counting on you.
The problem solving of podcasting.
That was from the trailer of Spider-Man: Far From Home. And I'm going to read the plot summary from IMDb. Following the events of Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man must step up to take on new threats in a world that has changed forever. We should point out before we begin our conversation of Spider-Man: Far From Home, we are going to spoil Avengers Endgame. You cannot talk about this movie without spoiling Avengers Endgame.
You know what also spoiled Avengers Endgame? The first 5 seconds of the trailer.
The trailer
for
Spider-Man: Far From Home spoiled Avengers Endgame. So, just FYI, we will make a separate spoiler note when we spoil Spider-Man: Far From Home, but we will be spoiling Avengers Endgame right up at the top. So, all that said, Dan Gvosden, you have made an online career of talking about Spider-Man. There is probably, 5 people in the world that know more about Spider-Man than you. I'm guessing conservatively. And so no one is better equipped than you or few people are better equipped than you to tell us how Spider-Man: Far From Home measures up in the corpus of Spider-Man related works. All that said, how does it measure up? How does it fit into the corpus?
Well, Dave, I guess my thoughts could best be summed up in the form of a limerick.
What?
Yes! Damn! Challenge!
The gauntlet is being thrown.
Bringing it.
Okay, here we go. There once was a boy who wore spiders. He said, "I've got to stop the gliders." Now we have a Benless take, and yes, I love Jake, but I'm not sure for what Peter aspires.
Oh. I like it.
I never said it was good.
I gotta say that was pretty weird, Dan. That was pretty weird.
I like it, but I'm not sure what your take on the movie is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. There once was a boy who wore a spider. What does that even mean?
He wears them on his suit. Yeah, his suit has pictures of spiders on him. I buy it.
Okay.
I was intending to refer back to the original films by saying he had to stop the gliders.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously,
like Green Goblin? Is that what you're talking
yes,
This
yes.
is
Whoa.
it looks like a spider web over here.
Yeah.
Man.
Yes, I'm sorry. I never claimed it was good, but I just thought it was the best way I could sum up my thoughts because Dave, you've mandated it.
It's true.
I for one appreciate it very much. If I had known, I wouldn't have even bothered this week because we hadn't met the quota.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so so Dan, putting that aside, what are your thoughts on the movie?
Well, I apologize again, but I mean, maybe it's just as confused as the limerick. Is like, I really enjoyed this movie. I think overall, but at the core of it, I have this kind of lingering question about how Spider-Man is being interpreted in this new series, and whether or not I really have bought into this expression of the character. I think a lot of these movies, both these movies, Homecoming and Far From Home, have kind of been a tale of 2 movies each, where the first Homecoming really to me was a journey about Peter becoming the Spider-Man that we kind of know and love. And here it seems very much like a weird regression of the character where he's kind of flipped on an opposite path. And I just felt like Peter didn't drive the action quite as much in this film as he did in the previous one. And it allowed me these questions to enter my mind about what I think about this interpretation of the character. I said it was Benless. There's no Uncle Ben in this world. And once you start peeling that stuff back, I started asking myself questions about what motivates this character, what are his goals, and is he really the central focus of these movies? And to me, this is a movie that kind of is missing out on a truly active protagonist. And that really hampered my love of it. But I do think it has one of the greatest villains in the MCU. And I'm very eager to talk about that once we can talk about that.
Yeah, so we should say nothing about the villain until spoilers, I think, is a good way to proceed.
Sure.
We get Venom in this movie.
What?
Yeah, the Venom cameo is crazy. No, there's no Venom. But Devendra Hardwar, your thoughts?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great refresher coming off of Endgame, which that movie was just like a big wallop of emotional turmoil for me. Like we described it pretty much like The Leftovers in the Marvel universe, and I really love that movie. But
The Leftovers, the HBO original show, not like leftover like unpleasant food or something. Yeah,
it's life after the rapture, basically. This movie feels just like the refresher we kind of need, but also the sort of reckoning of all of the events of Infinity War and Endgame. Like there's an entire world where half the population disappeared for 5 years and people have to live with that. And yeah, it's interesting that this movie kind of reflects on that, but also kind of goes back and it's a Spider-Man movie, of course. And it reminds me of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2, where he is kind of searching for his purpose. He is kind of doing the thing where he just doesn't want to be Spider-Man for a little while. He wants to have a normal life because the stuff is taking a toll. And it's entirely a movie about him like figuring out who he is as a character and what he wants to be as a hero. And yeah, I enjoyed pretty much all of it. It's funny. The action's great. Love Jake Gyllenhaal in this movie. He is hilarious. We'll definitely talk a lot more about like how he is in this film. And Tom Holland, I think, just really is cementing himself as like, for me, the definitive Peter Parker on screen. It's nice to have a Peter Parker that's young for once, or at least like much younger than Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. And it's also nice that he's surrounded by people who actually look like kids and who are pretty young too. So it's telling the very high school story of Spider-Man, and I'm here for it. I want to see more of that. And how can you not love Tom Holland? He's so endearing in this movie.
Jeff Kanata, your thoughts?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say my thoughts are best summed up in the form of a limerick as well.
Oh, wow.
Surprise, surprise.
Coincidence.
Sure, Spider-Man always defends the world and does it again, but this movie wins with how fun it begins, following Peter and his amazing friends.
All right. Yeah, that's not bad.
I love this movie, and I disagree that it is a Spider-Man movie. It is a MCU movie first, and a Peter Parker movie second, distant third, a Spider-Man movie. And I think that's a really interesting take. It is Marvel saying, okay, if we're going to have this character, we're going to make it about our stuff. And I'm fine with that. We've had, as you said, a corpus of Spider movies in the past, and plenty of exploration of that stuff on screen. I'm so excited for Peter Parker movies. Like, this movie is a straight up kids teen comedy for about an hour and a half. And I loved it. I was having a blast with it. I mean, there's very little spider suit in the first half of this movie, even more maybe. And then when Spider-Man does come, as Devendra said, the action is phenomenal and really much, much more interesting, in my opinion, than Homecoming even. It's a really interesting take. MJ in this MCU is such an interesting character, and one I'm just adore. there's lots to talk about in spoilers, but I love how this movie is so confident. It's so fine with letting us just hang out with Peter Parker and be into the stuff that Peter Parker is into, and the stuff that Peter Parker has always had a problem with in the comics, which is, I just want to be a kid and I have all these spider responsibilities that pile up, and then people smack me in the face with their superpowers, and I have to deal with all that. But I just want to be a kid. And I love that these movies are doing that. I mean, we've had such an incredible year to 18 months of Spider-Man stories, between the Into the Spider-Verse and the PlayStation 4 Spider-Man, which I think really belongs in the conversation as one of the great Spider-Man stories.
This movie also feels like it nods to that a little too.
A little bit.
Yeah. I think it is really impressive that in the last 12 months we have gotten 3 at least decent Spider-Man stories, if not much better.
I would say excellent. All 3 are excellent. Some of the best. I don't know. Clearly, you didn't come away from this movie liking it as much, but I can't wait to talk about spoilers because there's lots to discuss. But I think this movie does some stuff that's interesting narratively, and it really, it really has fun. And I love that it's able to have fun, especially as Devindra pointed out, in the shadow of Endgame, which is such a heavy experience, that this movie is like, okay, we can still be mourning some of our characters and still have that looming as a major plot point, and still be having a good time. And clearly, Marvel Feige and company have decided that Tony Stark is Uncle Ben in this universe. That's the stand-in for Uncle Ben is Tony Stark.
All right. Well, I'll just say, I want to get to spoilers as quickly as possible, that I enjoyed the movie as I was watching it. And it's a movie that, just because the chemistry between the actors is so good, obviously the relationship between Jake Gyllenhaal's character and Tom Holland's character is great. Jake Gyllenhaal is amazing in this movie. Single-handedly, increases this movie by half a letter grade for me.
Oh, most definitely.
In my book, just because he attacks that role with so much gusto. I just love what he's doing in this movie. But I have the same problems that Dan Gavossin has, which is that I just think that Spider-Man's arc is a bit of a mess after these last 4 movies that he's been in. And I also think that the movie just, the action didn't work for me quite as well as it did for you, Jeff. One of the great things that the Russo brothers brought to the MCU was this hand-to-hand combat that really helped to ground these movies in a very interesting way, because these movies are about gods, fighting with their special powers. But the fact that you have Thor and Iron Man and Thanos going hand to hand really helps to make it feel like maybe people actually did get into these suits and fight each other, and that probably didn't actually happen in real life, but there was a visceral nature to it that I really appreciated, and that is almost completely absent from this movie. There's just very little hand-to-hand combat, and that matters just because it's super heavily CG in a way that felt very weightless to me and inconsequential.
And without getting into spoilers, I think that is especially essential for this movie.
Yeah. And then I did a video review with Ben Pearson from /film.com, which you can find at my YouTube channel. And during that review, Ben pointed out that basically these, the first Spider-Man Homecoming, for those who don't recall, was a compromise between Marvel Studios and Sony. Right? They basically said hey, Sony, you own the rights to Spider-Man, you own the rights to make movies, but you're pretty bad at it.
Yeah.
So
and Sony was the dog sitting in the house on fire, and it was like, okay, maybe I need some help. Maybe this is not fine.
Yeah. So maybe just let Marvel make the movie, and maybe Sony can help with certain aspects of marketing. And actually, Richard Rushfield, in his newsletter, The Ankler, today, revealed that according to that deal, if Spider-Man Far From Home did not gross over $1 billion worldwide, the rights were going to revert back to Sony. Now, according to the current trajectory, that is not going to happen, so Marvel will get to make the third film if they so choose. So that is a good thing. But point being, when they first made Spider-Man Homecoming, this was like a completely new situation. Obviously, he had appeared in Civil War, but they didn't know how well this character would do in the MCU, and so they kind of hedged their bets a little bit by putting Tony Stark into the movie. I think they paid him like $5 million to be in like 10 minutes of that movie or whatever. And I think it really worked. You know, it really, I like that movie. But increasingly, it feels like these Spider-Man movies are having a very difficult time escaping from the shadow of Tony Stark. And I feel like they are worse off because of it. So this is a movie that I thought was very enjoyable while I was watching it in the theater. And thinking back on it, I kind of grapple with the same questions as Dan of like, what is the arc of this character, and like what really is the impact this character is going to leave in the broader, you know, corpus of works of Spider-Man, and I'm still unsure of that. So mixed review from me, but I'm glad everyone overall enjoyed the movie, including myself, and looking forward to talking about spoilers for Spider-Man Far From Home starting right now. So before we continue, we should point out that Dan Gvozden has written an excellent rundown of all the Easter eggs in Spider-Man Far From Home over at The Hollywood Reporter. How many Easter eggs you find, Dan? Like 50 or something like that, right?
It's at 52 right now, but many of them are layered within Easter eggs. So, I mean, and I made sure my editor titled it Easter eggs and references, lest people like fight me on like the definition of that.
I would be one of the people that would fight you for sure. But tell me what is your favorite or your couple favorite Easter eggs from this list?
Well, because we're in spoilers, one of my favorite Easter eggs is I think it's a dumb Easter egg, but the situation that it's in is kind of remarkable. So after the big fight with all the elementals at the end of the movie, there is like an overturned car on the bridge before Pete and MJ share their first kiss. We're deep in spoilers here.
Yeah.
And on the license plate of that car, it says TASM 143. And that is referring to the issue of Amazing Spider-Man number 143. Pretty obvious stuff. But the crazy thing about this Easter egg is that in that issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man goes to Paris, and before leaving, he kisses MJ for the first time. And then in Paris fights this villain called the Cyclone, which is clearly what the final villain in this movie was inspired by. And so like that, both of those scenes happen in this movie back to back, the fight against the Cyclone and the kiss with MJ. I can't imagine that the writers like read that comic and wrote it accordingly. Like they based their whole third act around, you know, the payoff of one comic from the 1970s. Like, that just doesn't make sense to me. So somewhere there was someone whose job it was to add these Easter eggs into the movie and change that license plate, who just had this sudden eureka moment that, oh my gosh, this issue covers both of those things. So anyway, I just imagine this guy in this room somewhere.
Well,
like,
why do you think that's more
brilliant.
likely than the writers being big Spider-Man fans and knowing about that? Like, why is it more likely that there's a guy sitting there who's
that
inserting...
seems like much rarer. Like,
yeah.
I would assume that they poured over the history of Spider-Man comics for ideas.
Well, because this villain has never reappeared really ever again. It's such a like trivial like fight to like go, we need to have this guy in the movie. You know,
also this movie, I mean, it's a trivial fight. Is it a trivial fight in the comic too?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, most superhero villain fights in comics are trivial, but I don't know. Like somewhere there was a eureka moment where they were like, we could do both these things at the same time. And that license plate is kind of an interesting representation of that in some way.
Well, we will link to your article in the show notes. It's a great article, and I'm very impressed with it. Like, as you mentioned in the article, virtually every license plate in the movie is a reference to a Spider-Man comic. Which is, I'm impressed that A, they did that, but B, that you and other people on the internet have somehow figured that out.
Yeah, what is the process of writing an article like this?
Yeah, are you sitting there writing down the license plates? Like, what's
are you just going to the movie a bunch of times and looking in the corners? Or how does it work?
Yeah.
Well, this one was unique. Like Into the Spider-Verse, I went like over a month ahead of time. with the idea that I would do this. So I just brought a pad of paper with me and just in the dark wrote out everything that I saw. And then, after the movie, I went, to the Shake Shack and just went through my list and said, was that a real thing or not? And then I actually emailed the people at Sony and said, hey, do you mind if I go and see it again? I wanted to see the movie again because I loved it so much. And I wanted to check one or two things. And then, I double checked it. This one, I didn't get to see it as early. I saw it like 5 days before it was released. So I saw it once, did the same thing, and brought a friend of mine who knows a little bit about Spider-Man with me. And we kind of had a beer and discussed what we had seen and, thought, well, does this sound right? And then, I wrote it all up. It was like 20 pages in a document and published it. And the night that the movie released, I went back and saw it again and emailed my editor furiously like, hey, there's like 3 things I have to change.
Yeah. But are you like looking at the license plate? Are you writing down every license plate number, every sign?
I actually remember this exact scene. The license plate is like up there in your face. Like it is kind of hard to ignore.
Yeah, no, but there's like many license plates throughout the film.
I know, but in that particular shot and like scene, like it is, and once you see TASM, basically, in my brain instantly went to the Amazing Spider-Man. So once you see those characters, you're like, oh, that's
TASM 143. Yeah.
But a lot of these Easter eggs are like just a few frames. It's remarkable.
It's just I don't know, quick recall. But the license plates, like they are there quick. Like the Sandman one at the beginning of the movie is barely visible, but that was also in the trailer, so I knew that it was there. Although it is interesting because they put different Easter eggs in the trailer based on how the trailer was edited than the movie. So they're not only creating fake scenes, they're creating fake Easter eggs for the trailer as well. But some of them are like fairly, if you're a Spider-Man fan, you're going to see it immediately. Like the back of Aunt May's car says AMF 1562, which is Amazing Fantasy 15 from 1962, the first issue with Spider-Man in it.
Yeah, there's no way in hell I would ever have gotten that, but that's why I'm glad we have people like you, Dan Gvozden. We need you on that wall. So check out this article about 50 Spider-Man Easter eggs and references at Hollywood Reporter. We'll link to it in the show notes.
Can I say one more really quick that's really monumental for the future of the series?
Yeah.
So there's a Fantastic Four Easter egg in this movie. Which I don't know when it was added in, but right at the end of the movie when Spider-Man is swinging to pick up MJ, there's a sign on the building that says, "We can't wait to show you what comes next." And then it has the numbers 1, 2, 3, and then a question mark. And each number is associated with the color of a member of the Fantastic Four. So I don't know when that was
So when you say the sign, just to be clear of what you're saying, okay? This is a construction sign in New York City that's like, we can't wait to show you this next. So it's like, if you've ever walked past a building under construction, they'll have like a sign, but of a drawing of the final building, and it's like, we can't wait to show you what's next. So that is what you are referring to in the final scene of Spider-Man Far From Home, right?
Correct, but it's also reinforced that it's on 41st Street and Park Avenue, and the Baxter Building where the Fantastic Four is on Madison Avenue and 42nd Street, just a block away. So. It's all there.
Who is I was gonna say, who is the Fantastic Four character that is not referenced in the 1, 2, 3?
The Invisible Woman, which is why it's a question mark.
Would be gone. Yeah.
Oh.
Wow.
Well, bravo, Dan. Bravo
indeed.
Yeah.
Jeff,
you're going to say something, right, Jeff?
Yeah, I have a question for you, Dave. Were you familiar with the character of Mysterio from the comic books?
So I vaguely knew that he is a bad guy.
Right.
But I didn't know more than that.
A master of illusions.
Yeah.
You didn't know any about the illusory stuff. You didn't know about him being a special effects artist on any of that stuff.
So I'll just say that when the Mysterio reveal, when it's revealed that he's a bad guy, and then Jake Gyllenhaal gives that whole speech in front of everyone, and they cut back to Iron Man 1. I'm freaking losing my mind over how cool this is, right?
That is like butter for David.
Yeah, it's just this is freaking amazing that they did this, right?
So cool, right?
Can we talk a bit more about that moment structurally? Because that's the moment where the movie came to life for me. Mm-hmm. Up until that point, the movie is kind of gaslighting Peter and the audience. But my biggest problem with this movie is that the thing they're gaslighting us with is really stupid. and I think is meant to be like a satire of Marvel villains.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
Marvel plot lines. But if you're like someone who knows Mysterio's a villain, or even just someone who like can read whether or not a movie is fully invested in something, like it seems very obvious that the movie's not invested in this. And so for the first hour of the movie, you're just waiting for like something to turn. And I had a really hard time buying into the stakes of this movie until that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's an interesting thing because I was right there with you in waiting for Mysterio to be Mysterio, but I kind of loved it. I kind of loved that the movie was doing this, and I think that's an interesting question to say. Do the filmmakers think they're fooling anybody? Which is why I asked Dave, like, what did you know about this character? Were you sitting around waiting for him to reveal the illusion? Because I was. And as you continue through this movie, you go, yeah, you know, it's clearly stuff isn't right. How much of this is an illusion?
Right.
You know, but I wonder if that experience for someone that maybe didn't have that expectation based on the character might be.
So my wife saw the movie separately than me for logistical reasons, and I think it is widely known that Mysterio is a bad guy. Like she knew it, and she
also, like, have you seen a movie before? You know, like big star
Right.
coming in, it's like, yeah. What do you expect?
Well, I think you could. I mean, if you really didn't know anything, you could think that Jake Gyllenhaal was being set up as a big new superhero hero.
But I don't even think they give him that treatment, though. Like, he's just kind of like at the periphery. Like, if this is going to be a big new hero in the Marvel universe, like, give me like that treatment of the character. Does it make sense?
I see.
Yeah. Well, my biggest problem with all of it gets, I guess, fixed or at least addressed in the end credits stinger.
Oh, I feel the same way about this.
We realized, I was like, there's no way Nick Fury would be this stupid.
It's really convenient that he's that dumb.
It feels like someone was like, guys, we really need to make Nick Fury not this dumb. And then they threw that in, but I kind of love it for that. I don't know, the magic dig of it, the pulling out the rabbit at the last second and going, oh, guess what? Nick Fury wasn't even there. I dig that just because I like being fooled, but I can understand how that might be feel a little contrived and easy.
Yeah,
well,
as you're watching it, it's rough.
What is really interesting about the Nick Fury reveal is that no one seems to know for sure how far back it has been happening. And there's been many theories online. John Watts, the director, has said that it's since the end of Endgame. But Dan, you and I spoke, and I showed you this video where Ryan Arey from Screen Crush convincingly argues that it has been for many, many movies that Nick Fury has not been around.
I hope that's true because it was really convincing.
Since 1997 or whatever, whenever he gets his eye cut and he's like, I'm peacing out of here, man.
Well, the thing that really blew my mind, and you got to watch this Screen Crush video about this. We'll link to it in the show notes. But it basically it argues it because if you'll recall in Captain Marvel, Nick Fury, they introduce themselves like, hey, tell me something that like only you would know about yourself, right? And he says, I don't like sandwiches cut diagonally, right? Like, I can't eat sandwiches cut diagonally. But in Captain America Civil War, there's a scene in a kitchen where he eats a sandwich diagonally.
And that can't be a coincidence, right? That can't be.
It can't be. It can't be.
That's too specific.
If it's not a coincidence, I feel like they are spending way too much time on elements like this and like way too little time on some of the really bigger things. Like, for example, in this movie, where at the beginning of the movie, Peter just loves MJ out of nowhere after doing no setup of that in the last movie, and then hanging all of his emotional stakes on his romance with this person we've never seen in that context.
It was a very jarring experience to go back and rewatch Spider-Man Homecoming after this because he spends 99% of that movie trying to hook up with that other girl in that movie. And then, I guess it just turned on a dime in this movie, which fair enough.
I guess you've never been a high school kid.
Fair enough. It's high school.
It's also
fair,
the story of
fair.
Peter Parker too, right? Like Mary Jane was not his first.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
But I think that that's ultimately love Mysterio, love the meta commentary on what it means to like make a movie or to create an illusion. Mysterio's whole plot is very much like it is a commentary on like Marvel movies. Right? It's like, hey, we have this big light show and we try to convince you that what's fake is real. And to have him walking around,
also twisting into like a fake news commentary too. Like it is that's what I think is brilliant about this movie, because I think it does kind of reflect on a lot of things happening now. It does it in a smart and not too cloying way. Like honestly, Mysterio feels like the character, like Jake Gyllenhaal's character from Nightcrawler, who just like went insane and got these powers and became a special effects whiz. Like it is that character, and he's channeling the same sort of like insane energy. And for me, that's how I was viewing the film. It kind of worked like that.
I think I really picked up on the commentary about America today, or the world today on a grander stage. But it really seems to me that the next movie is going to really take that on.
He won in this movie, guys. Let's be clear.
And it is fake news writ large at the end of this, the first stinger of this movie, and the fact that we have Jay Jonah back and
oh man,
like that.
Did your theaters applaud?
My audience had a big moment. Yeah.
Talk about like, well, there's really only one human on the planet that can play this part, so let's just cast him again.
Let's do it again. And also doing the like podcaster type thing from the game.
Straight from the game. It's brilliant. It's wonderful. But it really feels like if that's the hook for where Spider-Man is going in his next movie, it's going to be directly about talk radio and who do you believe and what's the truth, which I think is bold and really admirable that they might actually talk about that directly.
Everything about curious. Go ahead, Dan.
I'm very curious to see where they go with this particular twist, because the way they have it angled is that, Jonah has outed both Peter and his role as Spider-Man, where they could have just had him say, Spider-Man was the one behind, the execution order, which would have like reset status quo for Spider-Man, which is like the whole public thinks he's a menace and Jonah is the, mouthpiece against that. But like, what happens when a 16-year-old kid has to take on the whole world's law enforcement? That's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
It's also it's a bit of a twist on the end of Iron Man 1 too. Like it kind of brings things full circle, right?
Yeah, because at the end of Iron Man 1, he purposely admitted he's Iron Man. In this one, his identity is revealed to the world against his will, right? So there is this kind of echo of Iron Man 1's ending there for sure. I do think that this is going to be a huge world-altering event for Spider-Man. Like that the Spider-Man of the next movie will fundamentally be in a different place and have a different stature than the Spider-Man of this movie, and that's really interesting and exciting.
Also, we get another fundamentally world-altering notion for the entire MCU, which is there's a whole half of the population is 5 years displaced.
Well,
in their, but like the idea that they didn't age during that thing is a new bit of information. For the MCU.
I feel like
I think
feel
you were
like
giving
you that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
Devindra.
sorry, but I feel like that was the case. Like, or at least I don't know if the movie explicitly said that, but around Endgame, I think a lot of the conversation was like, oh, they're just back, and these people are the same age, and like there was commentary around like what this would mean for high school kids, and I loved that this movie directly like it starts there. It starts exploring that.
I mean, I think you two are being extremely charitable towards the film. I think that it laughs off this world-altering event. And that's fine, but just I'm not going to.
That's the new status quo for every MCU movie going forward: is the blip is canon.
Yeah,
sure, but like in reality, the blip would cause so many more problems than what's depicted in the film. And instead, it's just like, oh, hey, this is something we can laugh about, ha ha ha.
Yeah,
and that's fine. That's fine if that's the approach you want to take.
This
but
is
don't
a breezy, fun high school, like almost like a comedy.
Yeah,
like,
this is
agreed completely. But then you cannot give the film credit for like handling this huge change.
I'm not giving. I'm saying it's bringing up something that is going to have a reckoning in future movies. Like
I will be surprised.
The tapestry of the entire MCU.
I will be shocked if this is dealt with in any more gravitas than it was in this film.
Let's record.
Like, I think this is the way the movies, like this is the MCU's way of dealing with the blip, is my guess, because I think the implications are too large and too grave for these movies to actually address it in a meaningful way.
I mean, again, like you're taking the pessimistic view. We're just saying like, hey, it's interesting. Like we don't know, Dave. So at least just like accept like our potential optimism here. But also the whole idea of the blip is like writing movies is hard. You know, when you have this easy font of storytelling material, like you could do so much with this. So I'd imagine they would at least they wouldn't leave that untapped.
I have no issues with how they handle the blip. My issue is with how you guys characterized how they handled the blip. So I'm fine with how the movie depicted it. It's cool.
I wasn't talking about how they handled the blip. I'm talking about the fact that they make the blip a thing that is canon in this larger universe of movies. That is a thing that is going to exist for all the rest of the movies. And I can see what you're saying about maybe it not having gravitas, but it's not going to be unmentioned going forward.
Yeah, I mean that's fair enough. Dan, were you going to say something?
I was going to say I suspect that it might not be mentioned going forward. I feel like in the comics the blip never really was mentioned, but just this conversation about like the gravity of it is really interesting. And I enjoyed, Dave, your conversation with Brian Rowan about this a few months back in your Endgame coverage. But the thing about comics that I think is so wonderful is that they can handle seriousness and ridiculousness, very easily together. The drawn page allows for realistic renderings that are also like cartoony in a way that allows you to get away with this stuff. And I feel like the MCU is kind of trying to figure out where it lands in that. Can it be cartoony while also having serious gravity? And to me, this is like the biggest example of that is like, can this medium operate the same way as comics without undercutting like the reality that they're really going for?
Right. I think that's really well put, Dan. Let me present to you, Jeff. I know you're gonna have problems with the next thing I'm gonna say, so let's just do this right now, okay? Which is, I think my big challenge with these movies is that they make a bit of a mess of Peter Parker's arc, right? Put aside Civil War. Let's just say, hey, that was a freak event in Peter Parker's life. You start with Homecoming. And he spends most of that movie trying to become an Avenger. And then at the end, he's offered it. And he's like, nope, I actually don't need this. I'd rather be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Then in Avengers Infinity War, Spider-Man appears again. And he's like, well, you can't be the neighborhood Spider-Man if there's no neighborhood. He's snapped away and then comes back and fights in the big, battle at the end of Endgame. And then in this movie, again, he has gone back to a situation where he's like, actually, this thing that I've really wanted for many movies, or this thing that I really wanted for Spider-Man Homecoming, then didn't want at the end of that movie, then did want again during Infinity War, and now don't want again. I need to regain. It's
almost like his mentor died,
and
it changed how he thinks about things.
It's almost like, there's a life-altering event, and his perspective on the world is a little different, Dave. Like this,
It is almost like that, but it's not.
Almost like the movie is reckoning with the storytelling of the previous films within this franchise. Like, I don't see the problem because to me it's an organic approach to this. Like he has been through a lot. He's been to space. He's fought like the creature that destroyed the universe, and the person he looked up to most in the world has died. A bit of normalcy to me makes sense for a high school.
He literally goes through this whole movie going, I just want a break. I just want a vacation.
Just a vacation.
All I want is a vacation. He's like, I'm not going to be Spider-Man. I just want to go on this vacation. That's the entire premise of this movie is like, I just want this trip to be okay. I don't want to bring my suit to Europe. That's all. He doesn't say, I don't want to be Spider-Man. I don't want to be an Avenger.
He's not throwing it in the trash like Spider-Man 2 at this point. Like, he's just like, let's take a chill.
I literally need a vacation because the shit got weird,
It's interesting because he's unable to accept being the hero that they want him to be, but he's also unable to say no to it. So it's not a really active choice by his. It's just that kind of guilt and responsibility thing.
That's Peter
twist. Yeah. Of course, it's twisted and it's handled in a different way. And I actually think that that's really interesting. My problem with it is that I feel like it's surface deep. The death of Iron Man. It's a big moment for him, but he had nothing to do with the death of Iron Man. So if he wants to just wash his hands of being Spider-Man like he does at the beginning of this movie, and maybe not forever, but on a vacation, he certainly can go do that. And for me, and this is where I'm wrestling with it, because I don't want to be a guy that like strictly believes in a classical version of the character, but I just didn't feel there was no moment in this movie where I was like, yeah, here comes Spider-Man, because he's got to, this is him like making up for some guilt that he has. It more felt like other people were like, yeah, you should do it. And he's like, okay, I guess so. It didn't have that pull of, like, I know Dave and I, we talked about Into the Spider-Verse and the moment where Miles becomes a hero, and you said that wasn't enough for you. But like in that movie, like Miles has to live up to the specter of a dying Peter who like put this weight on him. And so it's not just his desire to like do good. He feels this guilted weight that like has to propel him into action. And I don't think any moment in this movie, I mean, it's a long walk to ask for something to measure up to the What's Up Danger sequence from Into the Spider-Verse. But there was no moment in this where I was like, here we go. Spider-Man is going to be the thing. And they try with the Peter Tingle thing, but that's not even fully fleshed out here enough to make that moment that powerful.
Let me just say this, Jeff, that I whether or not I agree with you on how this movie frames Peter's journey and how plausible it is, for me, that journey just wasn't super compelling. But I will say one thing I really appreciated about it is that moment at the end when Happy is talking about Tony Stark, yeah. I was like, why did I temporarily forget his last name? Tony Stark. Where he's like, Tony Stark, like that guy was a mess, constantly second guessed himself and like was frequently wrong or whatever. And I really like that because it's this idea that like the heroes that we look up to, we create versions of heroes in our mind, right?
Yes,
that are
right.
like unimpeachable. And in fact, like everyone's just human. Everyone's trying to deal with their own challenges. And I like that was a huge part of Spider-Man's journey in this movie, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I
he
think
builds his own suit, to the tune of Iron Man. So
Yeah.
that's
Tony
all.
in that moment.
He
Yeah.
becomes Tony. Like this is all a growth experience. We haven't even talked about Edith, which is terrifying, by the way, to give a high school student the ability to just like send killer drones to literally anywhere on Earth. This is the dark side of the tech from even from the Dark Knight, basically, but amped up all the way. And now it's for high school pranks. That's a whole other episode of the show.
Best acronym ever, though.
Yeah.
Even Dead, I'm the hero. That's amazing. That's
It's very good.
amazing.
It's very good, yeah.
You didn't find that the AC/DC like joke, while funny, undercut that moment a bit? Like he just finished telling him, don't be Iron Man, be Spider-Man. And meanwhile, I'm going to play Iron Man's theme under like what you're doing. Like
I feel like that's a nitpick that certainly I don't know. I did not have that nitpick, but certainly if we spend our time like diving into Spider-Man Forever, like that's I think super fans could easily be annoyed by that. For sure.
I'm just hoping that these movies can kind of like it's interesting. This is the second Spider-Man movie whose villain is a person that Tony Stark pissed off, and I just kind of am hoping that these movies can explore new non-Tony Stark territory next time.
Well, I feel like that's the setup with J. Jonah. But like I said, these are MCU movies first, and Spider-Man movies, I think, a distant third. And I think that's an interesting place to be with this stuff, personally. But it's because I'm down for the whole MCU, and I just love the tapestry that they're weaving.
And honestly, I'd love to see something fresh and completely different too. Like Spider-Man on the Run. The next movie is like the John Wick 3 of this set of Spider-Man.
That would be
movies.
cool.
So that'll be kind of fun. Quick shout out, by the way, to Martin Starr and JB Smoove in this movie, who I think did a great job, especially Martin Starr, of playing the harried school teacher trying to keep everyone safe during the worst field trip ever. Worst field trip.
A couple of other things to shout out.
Zendaya.
Yeah, I was gonna say Zendaya is great as
So
MJ, playing like kind of a non-conventional romantic lead, right? Like very like Daria-esque in her sullenness.
Yeah.
I like that. And
Can I just say one thing that I absolutely adore in this movie?
Hit it.
the fact that more than once we have Spider-Man reaching up, grabbing a mask, and pulling it off instead of it magically disapparating in a bunch of nanotech bullshit.
Yeah.
Sure. Even, but Jeff, by the way, most of the time he's wearing the suit in this movie it's usually CG because it's easier for them to do that.
I don't care. I don't want him. I don't want it to. That to me is Spider-Man. That moment of pulling that mask off and the hair flopping out of it is Spider-Man to me. And I hate the nano bullshit materializing the mask.
Does Jeff Canado hate nanotech?
I do.
I don't know.
If really its only application is to materialize clothes around my face, then yes.
All right. Any other closing thoughts before we wrap things up, gents? I'm glad for the spirited conversation as always.
Honestly, I haven't said much negative about this movie, but I do think the most contrived thing about this movie is that it takes place in Europe. Like it feels to me like that is so shoehorned into this movie, this European vacation. And it feels like the filmmakers are like, hey, why not? Let's go.
How refreshing was it to just be in Manhattan at the end?
Yeah.
Swinging through Manhattan, too, is also great. Like,
it was funny that the movie did a reversal of the swinging scene, right? Where, like, MJ is terrified and does not find it at all enchanting.
Right.
I thought that was, I don't think I've seen that before. So,
yeah. I just want to say, like, I still really like the movie, but I do think, like, I'm hoping that this third movie is like what Jeff said, where it allows him to really become Spider-Man. It'll be the first one set in Manhattan of these two movies. So, like, maybe that's it. They were waiting for the stage to open up for this character to really become, like, who we expect him to be.
Definitely. He better be working at Joe's Pizza in the next movie.
All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap us up for today. That's our conversation about Spider-Man Far From Home. And you've been listening to the Slash Filmcast. Find more episodes of this podcast at slashfilmcast.com. Email us at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. Our theme song comes from adamwarrock.com. Our spoiler bumper comes from filmmaker Kyle Hillinger. This episode was produced by Beatty Zhang. Stay tuned to hear what we'll be discussing next week. In the meantime, Dan Gvozden, where can we find more of your work on the internet?
Yeah, if you like Spider-Man, even in remote sort of way, come check out my podcast, The Amazing Spider Talk, where we're going through the history of the character as a transmedia property. So it's really kind of a discovery of how a character can be created and become an icon. And we have all these interviews with guests who've worked on the character over the years, and it's meant to be for people who know nothing about Spider-Man to learn a lot more about it. So if you're interested in that, check out Amazing Spider Talk, my podcast, and follow me on Twitter at @SupSpiderTalk.
How about you, Devindra?
I'm at Devindra on Twitter, and you can follow my tech work at Engadget.com. I'm also doing a tech podcast at nomortech.net. That's no with a K, and season 2 will be starting soon.
How about you, Jeff Kanata? Jeff? Kanata.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. I was doing my whole spiel, and I was muted. Okay, I will start again. I'm Jeff Kanata on Twitter. That's with 2 N's and 1 T. And hey, if you're listening to this, I'm guessing you like storytelling and you like big, cool, fun stories. If you wanted to do me the best solid, it would be to check out my new show, The Dungeon Run. I know you may look at it. You can Google it, or you can search on YouTube and for The Dungeon Run. The episodes will come up. They may seem a little intimidating because they're 3 hours plus long. I promise you, you're going to get some laughs. You're going to fall in love with these characters. You're going to have a great time. You can listen to it as an audio podcast. It's available as an audio podcast. We also record live on Wednesday nights, and you can impact the story yourself by showing up in the chat on caffeine.tv/The Dungeon Run, Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. Pacific. But this, as I said earlier in the show, is the thing I think I'm most proud of in my life that I have ever done professionally. And I'm putting my heart into it, and I would love more people to check it out because I really think it's special. I really do. So check out The Dungeon Run on YouTube as an audio podcast or on Caffeine Live Wednesday nights.
And find all my stuff at davechen.net. You can subscribe to my emails at davechen.net/letters. Next week, we'll be discussing Ari Aster's new movie, Midsommar. And
Sure.
Yeah, that'll be a discussion about a movie that we'll have. So thanks for listening.